This audio program is presented by Audible.com. Audible, audio that speaks to you wherever you are.
Audio Renaissance presents Failed States, the Abuse of Power and the Assault on Democracy by Noam Chomsky. Read for you by Alan Sklar with Rick Adamson. Preface. The selection of issues that should rank high on the agenda of concern for human welfare and rights is naturally a subjective matter. But there are a few choices that seem unavoidable because they bear so directly on the prospects for decent survival. Among them are at least these three: nuclear war, environmental disaster, and the fact that the government of the world's leading power is acting in ways that increase the likelihood of these catastrophes. It's important to stress the government because the population, not surprisingly, does not agree. That brings up a fourth issue that should deeply concern Americans and the world: the sharp divide between public opinion and public policy. One of the reasons for the fear, which cannot casually be put aside, that the American system as a whole is in real trouble, that it's heading in a direction that spells the end of its historic values of equality, liberty, and meaningful democracy. The system is coming to have some of the features of failed states, to adopt a currently fashionable notion that is conventionally applied to states regarded as potential threats to our security, like Iraq, or as needing our intervention to rescue the population from severe internal threats, like Haiti. Though the concept is recognized to be frustratingly imprecise, some of the primary characteristics of failed states can be identified. One is their inability or unwillingness to protect their citizens from violence and perhaps even destruction. Another is their tendency to regard themselves as beyond the reach of domestic or international law, and hence free to carry out aggression and violence. And if they have democratic forms, they suffer from a serious democratic deficit that deprives their formal democratic institutions of real substance. Among the hardest tasks that anyone can undertake, and one of the most important, is to look honestly in the mirror. If we allow ourselves to do so, we should have little difficulty in finding the characteristics of failed states right at home. That recognition of reality should be deeply troubling to those who care about their countries and future generations. Countries, plural, because of the enormous reach of U.S. power, but also because the threats are not localized in space or time. The first half of this audio program is devoted mostly to the increasing threat of destruction caused by U.S. state power, in violation of international law, a topic of particular concern for citizens of the world-dominant power, however one assesses the relevant threats. The second half is concerned primarily with democratic institutions, how they are conceived in the elite culture and how they perform in reality, both in promoting democracy abroad and shaping it at home.
Chapter 1. Stark, Dreadful, Inescapable. Half a century ago, in July 1955, Bertrand Russell and Albert Einstein issued an extraordinary appeal to the people of the world, asking them to set aside the strong feelings they have about many issues and to consider themselves only as members of a biological species which has had a remarkable history and whose disappearance none of us can desire. The choice facing the world is stark and dreadful and inescapable. Shall we put an end to the human race, or shall mankind renounce war? The world has not renounced war, quite the contrary. By now, the world's hegemonic power accords itself the right to wage war at will, under a doctrine of anticipatory self-defense, with unstated bounds. International law, treaties, and rules of world order are sternly imposed on others with much self-righteous posturing, but dismissed as irrelevant for the United States, a long-standing practice driven to new depths by the Reagan and Bush II administrations. Among the most elementary of moral truisms is the principle of universality. We must apply to ourselves the same standards we do to others, if not more stringent ones. It is a remarkable comment on Western intellectual culture that this principle is so often ignored, and, if occasionally mentioned, condemned as outrageous. This is particularly shameful on the part of those who flaunt their Christian piety, and therefore have presumably at least heard of the definition of the hypocrite in the Gospels. Relying solely on elevated rhetoric, commentators urge us to appreciate the sincerity of the professions of moral clarity and idealism by the political leadership. To take just one of innumerable examples, the well-known scholar Philip Zelikow deduces the new centrality of moral principles in the Bush administration from the administration's rhetoric and a single fact, the proposal to increase development aid to a fraction of that provided by other rich countries relative to the size of their economies. The rhetoric is indeed impressive. "I carry this commitment in my soul," the President declared in March 2002 as he created the Millennium Challenge Corporation to boost funding to combat poverty in the developing world. In 2005, the corporation erased the statement from its website after the Bush administration reduced its projected budget by billions of dollars. Its head resigned. After failing to get the program moving, economist Jeffrey Sachs writes, having dispersed almost nothing of the $10 billion originally promised. Meanwhile, Bush rejected a call from Prime Minister Tony Blair to double aid to Africa, and expressed willingness to join other industrial countries in cutting unpayable African debt only if aid was correspondingly reduced. Moves that amount to a death sentence for more than 6 million Africans a year who die of preventable and treatable causes, Sachs notes. When Bush's new ambassador, John Bolton, arrived at the United Nations shortly before its 2005 summit, he at once demanded the elimination of all occurrences of the phrase Millennium Development Goals from the document that had been carefully prepared after long negotiations to deal with poverty, sexual discrimination, hunger, primary education, child mortality, maternal health, the environment, and disease. Rhetoric is always uplifting, and we are enjoined to admire the sincerity of those who produce it, even when they act in ways that recall Alexis de Tocqueville's observation that the United States was able to exterminate the Indian race without violating a single great principle of morality in the eyes of the world. Reigning doctrines are often called a double standard. The term is misleading. It is more accurate to describe them as a single standard, clear and unmistakable, the standard that Adam Smith called the vile maxim of the masters of mankind, all for ourselves and nothing for other people. Much has changed since his day, but the vile maxim flourishes. The single standard is so deeply entrenched that it is beyond awareness. Take terror, the leading topic of the day. There is a straightforward single standard. Their terror against us and our clients is the ultimate evil, while our terror against them does not exist, or if it does, is entirely appropriate. One clear illustration is Washington's terrorist war against Nicaragua in the 1980s, an uncontroversial case, at least for those who believe that the International Court of Justice and the UN Security Council, both of which condemned the United States, have some standing on such matters. The State Department confirmed that the U.S.-run forces attacking Nicaragua from U.S. bases in Honduras had been authorized to attack soft targets, that is, undefended civilian targets. A protest by America's Watch elicited a sharp response by a respected spokesman of the left, New Republic editor Michael Kinsley, who patiently explained that terrorist attacks on civilian targets should be evaluated on pragmatic grounds. A sensible policy should meet the test of cost-benefit analysis of the amount of blood and misery that will be poured in, and the likelihood that democracy will emerge at the other end. Democracy as defined by U.S. elites, of course.